Welcome to ABC Behavior Training, where we're disseminating the science of ABA to everyday behavior analysts through resources, education, and supervision. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at abcbehaviortx.com.
This CEU is going to be a supervision crash course. So we're going to be going over really all of the basic stuff that you need to know about supervision, as well as some tips, resources, and technology that you can use. Just to give you a little information about myself, my name is Melissa Dreskis. I'm a BCBA. I have a background in speech language pathology and audiology. I have a master's in applied cognition and neuroscience, and I completed the graduate certification program in ABA from Florida Tech. I have over 10 years of clinical experience. I've worked as a BCBA mentor and consultant. I've done graduate level teaching experience, and I'm also the owner of ABC Behavior Training. So that is primarily what I do now, providing resources and supervision through my company. So if you're not familiar with ABC Behavior Training already, our goal is disseminating the science of ABA to everyday behavior analysts. So that means coming to you where you're at in your job and giving you the resources and tools that you need to be more effective and efficient in the work that you're doing, because I have been there, and really all of these things that I create are things that I needed as a BCBA that didn't exist. So I made them really to make my life easier. So we do this through resources, which we'll go over some of the supervision related ones today, but we have experience trackers, supervision evaluations, curriculum, I have BCBA planners, and then some productivity stuff like report writing, templates, and time tracking, and all of that. And then we do it through education. So this is one of those things, which is a free one. Usually I have more intensive CEUs that I do through masterclass workshops. I've just came out recently this year with intensive competency workshops, which are really unique because it's a deep dive into a certain topic, but then it has a live mentorship component to it, which you don't often have that opportunity to get that competency piece when you're trying to learn new material. And then I also do a one-to-one consultation, supervision mentorship, and a company consultation. And then, of course, we have the piece of supervision, which is for students that are earning their supervised fieldwork hours. I provide supervision using a structured curriculum. There's a lot of opportunities for unrestricted hours. They're able to learn from a varied team of experienced BCBAs. And then there's group supervision opportunities with other supervisees that are going through the same cohort as they are. And then just a disclaimer for all of my CEUs, some of the materials that we're going to discuss in this presentation are sold by myself for profit, but there's no obligation to purchase any of these tools, and the presentation is not for the purpose of selling any of the resources mentioned. Like I said at the beginning, I really create all of this stuff because I needed it, and if you have the time and technological ability, you can create these things too. But we'll go over it so you can see what it looks like if you want to create them on your own, or if you want to use things I've already created. So the content that we're going to go over today, we're going to go over the requirements first. So that's going to be an overview of the BCBA supervision requirements, and that information primarily is going to come from the BCBA handbook. Then we're going to go over ethics, a review of our ethics code related to supervision. And then we have technology. I'm going to look at some of the things technology related that I use that can make your supervision easier. And that's whether it is in person or remote supervision. And then resources. So we're going to take a look at the resources that I've made that can make your supervision more effective and efficient, because supervision can be really time consuming. And again, I created a lot of stuff just to make it easier, so you can see how you can incorporate similar things into the supervision that you do. So the first thing we're going to take a look at are the requirements. So that's going to be just, again, the BCBA handbook. I know everybody can go through and read it, but still there's a lot of questions that people get when they're going through that. So we're going to kind of simplify what that looks like and how that plays into the supervision that you're providing. So the first thing we want to look at is the supervisee eligibility. So there's actually 4 pathways that supervisees can become BCBAs, but I'm only going to look at the first 2 because those are the most common ways that you're going to encounter. So the first one is from a degree from an ABAI accredited master's or doctoral program. So that's going to be they got their master's degree in something that's ABA related. So within their master's degree, they already took all the required courses that they needed to be eligible to become a BCBA. And it must have been obtained at 2015 or later because, again, it's based off of the content that was included in there. And then, of course, they have to have supervised fieldwork. And then pathway 2 is that they got a master's or doctoral degree in any subject from a qualifying institution. And then they also got behavior analytic coursework for the 5th edition task list. And then they have the supervised fieldwork. So this pathway 2 has changed a little bit, and it really depends on how long you've been a BCBA doing supervision. If you remember this, I became a BCBA and got certified in 2015. So I was in like the first cusp of this going through. So I got my master's degree in neuroscience, and then I did the behavior analytic coursework. And then shortly after that, they changed the requirements, and then they only accepted certain degrees in like education and I don't remember what else, psychology and a couple of things, right? So that really cut out people coming from neuroscience, people coming from speech language pathology to get that additional coursework to become a BCBA. Well, now they've changed it again and they've opened it back up. So now we're back to any degree and any subject can qualify for that pathway 2, as long as you have that behavior analytic coursework that you did after the fact. So if you're a little confused about what that looks like, it's just because they've kind of flip-flopped that over the years where it was open to anything, then it got, kind of shrunk down to only a few degrees they were accepting, and now it's opened back up to everyone again. So, which I think is great because it allows more people from varying fields come into behavior analytic work. And then just something to note that your supervisees should be aware of. You cannot start counting any fieldwork hours until behavior analytic coursework has been started. So let's say that they're getting a degree in education and then there's like some behavior analytic coursework that they're going to take in addition to that degree, or that's a part of their degree plan to allow them to also become a BCBA. If their like first semester doesn't include that behavior analytic coursework, they cannot start counting hours. So it's not until they've started taking the coursework that is related to ABA that they can start counting those hours. And their different universities that they're going through should be able to give them information on when those courses start, and hopefully they start right at the beginning so they can start counting their supervised fieldwork hours. Now, supervisor eligibility. So this is you and what you need to have to be able to provide supervision. So you have to be an active BCBA without any sanctions, and you need to have been a BCBA for at least 1 year, or if you've been a BCBA for less than a year, then you need to have monthly consultation from a qualified consulting supervisor. And a qualified consulting supervisor needs to have at least 5 years as a BCBA to be that supervisor. And there's like forms on the BACB website where you can document this supervision as well. That's going to allow you to be able to provide supervision to other people. So that can happen a lot of times within a company. Maybe the clinical director or somebody is that qualified consulting supervisor. And if you don't have that, you can find that outside of where you're working. I provide that type of supervision, and I know others do as well. And then you have to meet the ongoing supervision requirements. So that's the 8-hour initial CEU, and then the 3 hours ongoing supervision CEUs for every time that you recertify. And then you can also be, if you're not a BCBA, you can be a licensed or registered psychologist who was tested in applied behavior analysis, or an authorized verified course sequence instructor. But those last 2 are probably less common than most of you guys are probably BCBAs. So getting started with supervision, you want to ensure that your supervisee has created a BACB account because they're going to need that account number on all of the monthly verification forms. Ensure that they understand the BCBA handbook. And then you need to have a supervision contract signed for all supervisors that are going to provide supervision. Plan your documentation system, which we're going to go over what's required for that. And then also plan how hours are going to be accrued for the fieldwork hours and get any other permissions needed. So as I do remote supervision for people that, aren't within a company that I work for, I need to get parent consents to do recording and to share client information, and employer consents as well. If you are just within a company, then you probably don't need those additional consents. And just a tip is that, especially if you're doing a lot of supervision, I recommend creating an orientation for new supervisees to ensure that they understand all of the BACB requirements and also your expectations. So I have kind of like an orientation that I have on my site, but I also do it for my supervisees. It's called Intro to Supervision, and it kind of goes over all of those requirements. But you can either have something standard that you do in your first meeting, or you can even just record it. So it's more hands-off and you don't have to take the time to go over the same information over and over again. But I would not recommend just saying, did you read the BCBA handbook and do you understand it? Because again, I have supervisees and also supervisors that get a lot of questions from the handbook. So make sure that they really do understand what's required, and also that they understand your expectations, because all of us are going to have a little bit of different expectations that we have from our supervisees. And then the contract. So this must be signed before the start of supervision. One thing I've seen a lot on Facebook recently is like a lot of people are like, oh, my company wants me to sign a contract. And I think there's a little confusion there. A lot of times within a company that are providing supervision to their employees, those types of contracts are like, you need to pay us back for supervision if you leave, or you need to stay and work as a BCBA for so much amount of time afterwards. And that's probably the thing that people are complaining about not wanting to sign. The supervision contract should absolutely be separate from that. That's not that type of company related contract that's keeping an employee there or making them pay the money for supervision. This is a contract that is about the responsibilities and expectations of supervision. So in the contract, these are things that need to be included, and this is per the BACB, not just what I include in mine. It does actually need to be included in all of them. You should have the responsibilities for each party, each supervisor's role if there are multiple supervisors, a description of appropriate activities and training objectives, an explanation of when you will not sign the monthly or final verification forms. It can't be due to lack of payment. So if you do remote supervision, you can't say, I'm not going to sign your forms because you owe me money. That is a separate matter, but there are times when you wouldn't want to sign those forms, and we will go over that in this first section here. Then we want to cover the consequences for not adhering to the responsibilities, including termination of supervision. A statement regarding the written permissions from supervisees, employers, or parents, or whatever those consents are, an agreement to follow the BACB ethics code, and then a statement declaring that each party is going to keep all of the documents for at least 7 years or longer if your state requires longer documentation collection, and then submit them to the BACB if you're ever audited or if they ever request that information. So let's go over the different fieldwork types. Now, I am sticking to the BCBA fieldwork types. BCABA, it's similar, but of course it's less. So again, you can look at the BCABA handbook and look at those different hours for them. But both, regardless of which one it is, there's two options. There's supervised fieldwork and then concentrated supervised fieldwork. Now, you and your supervisee are going to determine which one they're going to do, what works best, and you can have a combination of them throughout the the supervision experience. So it's not like you have to stick with one and then that's it and never change it. You can change it. So just go off of what hours and what work the supervisee is doing, and then also what you can commit to as the supervisor, because the concentrated supervised field work is a lot more. So supervised field work, that's going to be 2,000 field work hours required to sit for the exam. And then for concentrated, that's going to be 1,500 hours. So that's knocking 500 hours off of that total time. For both of them, the supervisory period is 1 calendar month. So that's going to be, November 1st through November 30th or 31st, whatever the last day of the month is. And then the fieldwork hours is the same for both, which is a minimum of 20 hours and a maximum of 130 hours. And those hours include supervision hours. So it's not like they do 130 hours and then you do more hours on top of that to get your percentage. 130 is the max that they can claim for the entire month. They can't go beyond that at all. And now for the number of contacts with the supervisor. For supervised field work, that's going to be 4 contacts. And for the concentrated, that's 6 contacts. So you should be having more contacts with your supervisee because, again, it's concentrated. It should be a more intensive supervision experience. For both of them, you need to have 1 client observation per month, which is the per supervisory period. And for supervised field work, that's going to be 5% of their hours should be supervised. And for concentrated, that is 10% of their hours are supervised. So it's double the amount of supervision. So if they're doing the max amount of hours, 130, instead of 6.5 hours of supervision per month, that's going to be 13 hours of supervision per month. And that's why it should definitely be a discussion instead of them just automatically wanting to go to the quicker option, because on you, the 6.5 hours versus 13 hours, that is a very big difference. You're going to be spending a lot more time with that person with the concentrated supervised field work. So you want to make sure that you are able to do that. And now individual and group supervision. At least 50% of their hours must be individual. And of course, it can be more. You can do 100% of your supervision as individual supervision. But if you do group supervision, it cannot be more than 50% of the supervision that they're receiving. And that's per month. That's not over the whole experience, but that is just per month. You can't go over that 50% group supervision. And then unrestricted activities. At least 60% of their hours must be spent in unrestricted activities. And this is the one and only thing that they're talking about that's going to be over the entire experience. So everything else that we're talking about with those timeframes, that's per supervisory period. That's for the 1 calendar month. But for this percentage, it's over the whole fieldwork experience. It's pretty common that at the beginning, when they're first starting off, they're going to have a lot of restricted hours because they don't know the unrestricted activities to do yet. We've not trained them with it. So starting off, they might have a ton of restricted hours, but as they go through and learn more, they should be getting more and more unrestricted hours, and it needs to be at least 60% by the time they're done of unrestricted activities. Okay, now let's talk about documentation and what this needs to look like for documenting the hours for the various things that you're doing through supervision. So the first thing is field work hours. This is the work that the supervisee is doing. So the supervisee needs to document the date, the start time, the end time, the field work type, the supervisor, even if that person is not present, but who is the supervisor that's responsible for these hours that they're doing, and then if it's restricted or unrestricted work. And they need to document that for every instance of their fieldwork hours. So sometimes I have seen that they've done ABA therapy from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. in a clinic. Well, that doesn't count because you didn't do the same thing with the same client with no breaks from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You have to actually document maybe from 9 a.m. to 11, you were with such and such client. And I also have a note section for them to note what it is that they're doing. Then maybe they took a break, and then from this time to this time, they were researching programming, and then they were with another client. So it should actually be pretty detailed of the work that they're doing, what that looks like. And it's not listed on here because it's not actually listed on the BCBA handbook. But when I have my supervisees tracking their hours, I also have client listed there because I want to know what client all of it's related to, because everything that they're doing needs to be related to a client that they have. They can't just do something because it's fun and interesting for them. Hopefully it is still fun and interesting, but it has to all be client related. So I always have that section there so we can go back and look, what client is this related to? If they're learning something that's general, like, how to implement a man training program, that might be related to all of their clients, but they still have a spot to list that so we can make sure it's still relevant. And then supervision hours. So supervisors need to document the date, start time, end time, the format of the supervision meeting. Was it in person or online? Fieldwork type, was it individual or group, restricted or unrestricted? Did you observe a client or not? And then a summary of the supervision activities. And this should be for every instance of supervision. So I say that, and the other one, supervisee needs to track their hours and supervisor needs to document their hours. And it really is a joint thing that you should be doing. I recommend that the supervisor is tracking all of their hours because you should be responsible for what you're assigning to your supervisee, that summary of activities, the to-do list, so they know what things should be done. And I do put that on the supervisor to kind of document that. I have the supervisee take my note and put it into their tracker so they can see their supervision hours, but I am the one that keeps more of the notes on that, and then I provide that to the supervisee. And now one thing that a lot of times there's not specific supervision notes because we might think that our company session notes are going to be sufficient, but these are likely not going to count as this type of documentation, because if you're in a company and you're providing supervision to your supervisee with a client that you're working with, those notes are likely going to be client focused and not supervisee or tech focused. So just take a look at that. See, does it include all of this information? Is it supervisee focused? And if not, they're probably not going to count as your supervision notes. So just be aware of that, because a lot of times people don't track this and they just think that it's tracked with the SOAP notes or session notes that you're doing through your company. And again, a lot of times it's not going to meet that criteria. And then we have monthly hours. So this is going to be more like a summary of what occurred through the month. So the supervisee should be tracking all of their hours. They should also input your supervision hours based off of the notes that you provide them. And then all of this should come together with monthly hours. And this is going to demonstrate that they're meeting the minimum requirements per calendar month. So that means that they're meeting the fieldwork hours, the number of supervisor contacts, observations with the client, the supervision percentage, and then the individual supervision percentage. That means like individual versus group supervision, making sure that that's accurate. So it's not necessarily a completely separate thing that you need to track. I'm going to go over how I track my hours at the end when we talk about resources, but I have my supervisees put their hours in on an Excel tab monthly, and then it all goes and generates over onto a dashboard where they have all of this information monthly. And then if there's anything that's not meeting the criteria, it highlights a certain color so we can pinpoint any issues before we sign off on any verification forms. All right, and then we also want to talk about what counts towards these hours, right? Because we've talked about restricted and unrestricted, and sometimes there's some confusion as far as what here is going to count in these activities that your supervisee can be doing. So restricted activities, this is typical like direct ABA therapy work. So that's going to be delivery of therapeutic and instructional procedures, ABA therapy provided by an RBT or behavior tech, teaching, utilizing ABA concepts. So if you're working with somebody who's a teacher, a lot of times, a lot of their work is actually going to count towards their hours, but it's going to be like utilizing these concepts like shaping, prompting, error correction, reinforcement, things like that. And that's all going to count towards restricted activities. But not all direct work with a client is restricted. So just because your supervisee is working with a client, that doesn't mean that automatically it's restricted. Like they could be doing some unrestricted activities with the client as well. So unrestricted activities, these are the things that we really want to focus on our supervisees getting, because they need at least 60% of their hours coming from these unrestricted activities over the course of their supervision experience. So all of this also needs to be behavior analytic in nature and also relevant for a client. So collecting baseline data, that can be an unrestricted activity, whether it's for a new program or for an assessment. Training staff and caregivers are included here. Conducting assessments like the VB-MAP or ABLES or a behavioral related assessment can be included. And of course, we want to make sure that they're competent and able to do this with our supervision. Attending or leading caregiver or client meetings, graphing and analyzing data, researching literature that's relevant to a current client, and also writing and revising programs. So this is not an exhaustive list. Like there's probably a bunch more stuff that the person could be doing for their unrestricted activities, but this just kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like for the individual. And then again, just making sure it's behavior analytic in nature. Like if they're going to go to an IEP meeting, or like a school meeting, I think it would be called an IEP meeting everywhere, but if they're going to go to a school meeting to support a client, or if they're in a school setting, like the only portion of that meeting that would count would be the behavioral related portion. When they're talking about other stuff that's like not applicable at all to what we do, those portions of the meetings wouldn't count. So just make sure that they're not just lumping everything together and really looking at what pieces of what they're doing are unrestricted. Also, if you are in like a home health or a clinic-based setting, if the tech has the end of the session where they talk to the parents a little bit about what's going on, even if it's like 10, 15 minutes, I always make sure that my supervisees track that bit as unrestricted activities. And yes, that means it's another line that they have to enter into their tracker, but that's going to add up over time and help add towards their unrestricted activities that they're counting. And then we have unacceptable activities, so things that are not going to count. So meetings or trainings that are not behavior analytic in nature, if they have to go to like a CPR class for their certification, that's not going to count. Interventions or assessments that are not based in behavior analysis, administrative activities, didactic course assignments. So that's going to be from their coursework. So if they're in school, their assignments through school don't count. Of course, assignments that you give them that are specific to them or even based off of the supervision curriculum, all of those things would count because it's for them specifically and should be related to their clients. And then professional conferences, workshops, or university courses also are not going to count. One other thing that I would say that does not count, we're going to talk about podcasts here in a minute, but making materials. That's a big one. I always see that, oh, I'm going to, print out all of these action cards and laminate them and cut them, and I'm going to have a bunch of hours by making all of these materials. Making materials does not count as BCBA related activities. If they are researching targets while selecting these materials, that could count because that's a part of creating the program and the targets that the client's going to work on. But just sitting there cutting and laminating and sticking Velcro to stuff, that doesn't count. That's a part of what we do very often in ABA, but it is not anything that's going to grow their skill as a behavior analyst. So that does not count. Make sure that that's not a thing that they're gaining a bunch of hours for. However, If they do have to do that, I do let them know, maybe listen to a podcast or something like that while you're making materials, because then it doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're attending to it. Then sometimes I will let those things count. So podcasts, journal articles, and videos. A lot of people ask, do these things count? As the supervisor, you get to decide what counts and what does not count. You have the final say in that. If you contact the BCBA, the BACB, they're not going to tell you. I let these things count, but there is a big but here. It needs to be relevant for a current client. It needs to be basically that they are researching stuff that they can use with a client. Just like if I have a client that's having difficulty with something and I'm going to start looking through, the articles and the things that are out there for me to learn a new skill to apply with this client, it's the same for them. And then I also am going to need documentation about whatever it was. I have review templates in my curriculum that I use, and it's a structured form. I want to know what it was about. How can you apply this to your current client? I want a description of the quality of the information, a lot of stuff that they have to fill out that's relevant for that. So then we have something that says, this is what I did, and this is how it's relevant to my client, and this is how I used this information. It's not going to be like listening to a fun, entertaining podcast. Well, it still can be fun and entertaining. That's sad to say. It still can be fun and they can learn stuff. But there are some podcasts that I can think of that are not going to be included in stuff that they can count towards their supervision hours, but there's also a lot of really good stuff out there that, cites multiple studies. Maybe it's an interview with somebody who did a lot of this research and things like that. It can be useful for them to learn information to apply with their clients. But again, you get the final say on this. You can choose if you want those things to count or if they don't. And if you do let them count, what sort of documentation it is that you are wanting to make sure that it's legitimate and actually growing their skills and it's relevant to a client. I just see another chat box come up here. Okay. I just got a direct message. I'll address it real quick here. Somebody asked if they're going to get access to the recording and slides. And yes, you guys will get access to the recording and slide and your CEU certification and all of that. And I'll talk about that towards the end here. Okay. There we go. Okay, so monthly verification form. So as we know, like in addition to all the other documentation that we do, there's two main forms that we have to sign, which is the monthly verification form and the final verification form. These are on the BACB website. Do not create your own. Use what the BACB has on there. You need to use those specific forms and fill them out in the manner in which they state. I believe you can't fill it out in a web browser because that's going to have formatting issues, and then it's going to cause issues when you go to submit this, when your supervisee goes to submit it. So the monthly verification form, what does your signature mean? Because you are signing off on this monthly form. So it's really important that we understand what it is that we're signing off on. So you are signing off for the monthly verification form that the hours reported by the supervisee are correct. So whatever the supervisee is saying that they did, you are in agreement that they did actually do those things, that you meet the requirements for providing supervision. So let's say that you did your recertification and you forgot to do those supervision CEUs. Well, you're not eligible to provide supervision anymore. So you can't be providing supervision, and you also can't be signing off on that form. So that's a big part of what you're signing on. And then also that the monthly requirements were met. And that means that you had the appropriate number of supervisory contacts, client observations, supervision percentage, and all of that is correct. And also that only behavior analytic activities were counted. So you can see if you do not have a good documentation system in place, that how are you going to be signing off on this legitimately that you know these things are accurate? So that's why it's really important to make sure you have a very good structured system to make sure that when you sign off on this monthly verification form, you know that all that information is correct and you can put your signature to it, knowing that there shouldn't be any problems with it. And then the final verification form. So this is the bigger one. This is what they get signed off for at the end of their supervision experience, or at least the end of their supervision experience with you. Maybe they are moving or changing supervisors. So here your signature means that all of the hours you're signing off on meet the requirements. And again, that's client observation, supervision percentage, restricted hours, all of those things that we've already talked about. Also, that everything was done in compliance with the experience standards and the ethics code and our professional guidelines and everything that we should be following. And a big key piece here that I don't know that we're all checking is that supervisee is reasonably competent on the task list. And that's determined by you as the BCBA. So how do we know if our supervisee is competent on the task list? You should be checking these things. You should be doing competency assessments. You should be doing hopefully more than just going in, doing your supervision because they're working with a client that you're working with. And then that's it. There's so much more to it that we need to make sure that this person is competent before we sign off and say, okay, go on, take your exam and go and be a BCBA. And unfortunately, a lot of people just don't get that experience. And then we see new people entering the field and they haven't done a lot of the stuff that a BCBA should know how to do that they should have gotten in their supervised field work, just because we either don't have the time to provide that supervision. We have a ton of other stuff that we're doing, or a lot of supervisees that we're working with, or we're just really not sure how to structure it to make sure that they get to all of those things. So this is a really important aspect here. And there shouldn't ever be a situation where your supervisee is confused and surprised that you're like, I'm not going to sign off on this because you've not demonstrated any sort of competency. There have been like 2 occasions where I've not signed off on a final verification form. It was not a surprise. And there was also a plan in place of things that I needed them to do and demonstrate to me for me to be able to sign off on it. And then so we did those things and I was able to sign off on it. But don't be afraid or concerned to not sign off on this verification, because it's very important that we make sure that our supervisees are competent, reasonably competent for like an entry level BCBA, somebody that is new, before we just give them the sign off to go ahead and go. And that's where our supervision comes into play, that they should learn all those things and have all those opportunities through the supervision that we're providing. So some tips about this. Don't assume that your supervisee is tracking all of the info that you want them to track or that they need to track. You should provide them with the tracking tools to make sure it's exactly what you want. We don't want to just assume that they are tracking everything appropriately, because they might not know. They're new to this field, and they might not understand all the things that should be tracked. Check their hours. Ask for permanent products of their work if you need to see what it is that they are actually doing. And like I've said before, same on the supervisee side though, session notes and timesheets will not usually contain all of the required information. So them just doing their session notes for their clients, that's not necessarily going to be sufficient for tracking their hours. You do need to have something separate from that for tracking the hours with all of the different information that is required for the BACB. Also, if monthly forms are not signed by the deadlines, which is 1 month following that supervisory period, then that month does not count. So make sure you decide ahead of time who is responsible for signing the form first and sending it to the other person, and have all of that set out before supervision starts, because you don't want to have a situation where, uh-oh, we forgot to sign your form. Now you have, these amount of months that don't count, because you can't backdate your forms. They need to be signed accurately and within a timely manner. This is a really big one that a lot of people don't realize. So I've even included on here the BCBA handbook page that this states this, but a supervisee must meet the minimum requirements with every organization or supervisor, if it's an individual not within an organization, those minimum requirements for everyone. So what does that mean? Let's say that somebody is getting supervision through their company, but they want a little bit of, extra support or access to more unrestricted hours. So then they're going to come to me and say, hey, can you also provide me with supervision? But I only want to do unrestricted hours with you. Well, that's great, but you still have to have client observation with me. You still have to have 4 contacts with me. I still have to provide you with 5% supervision on the hours that I am supervising you for. So that can be a barrier sometimes for people that want to have this supervisor do this and this supervisor do that when they're at different organizations. You absolutely can have supervisors from different organizations or different individuals doing this, but you do have to meet the requirements for each person. And it is going to give you a really good experience, but that just means that, you can't have one supervisor outside of an organization that's like only doing group supervision. Honestly, that would be great if I could do that. And I could just I'm doing your group supervision and that's all. That wouldn't work because I wouldn't be doing the client observation and I wouldn't be staying within that 50% group supervision for what I was doing. And you can't have one supervisor again, outside of an organization that is only providing you with unrestricted hours without observing you with a client. Again, you can do tons of unrestricted stuff with a client, but usually people that are looking for that, at least with me, they're looking for it minus that client observation piece because maybe they're getting that at their company. But you can't like piecemeal this together. And you still do need to be within the minimum and max hours combined. So it's not like you can have 2 different supervisors and get, 260 hours per month. It's still a max of 130 hours combined, but they have to meet those requirements that we talked about, 5% supervision, 1 client observation, 4 supervisory contacts, and 50% or less group supervision. They need to meet those requirements with each supervisor that they have. Now, I keep saying outside of an organization. Obviously, if you work at a company, and maybe you have one main supervisor and somebody else does group supervision and stuff like that, that's fine because they're going to be using an organization form for that monthly and final verification form. So that's okay. At my company, I have multiple supervisors that work for me. Some of them just do group supervision. Some of them do individual supervision. So that one supervisee might see several people, but that's okay because I'm an organization. We're also using those organization forms. So a way that you can think of if you need this, for every person that's doing that monthly verification form, whether it's a couple of different organizations or a few different supervisors, for all of those people, they need to meet those requirements for each monthly verification form that they have. So again, that's something that it's really kind of hidden in the BCBA handbook, while talking about like combined experiences. So it's not super clear. So a lot of people might miss that sometimes. So just make sure if you do have a supervisee that has multiple supervisors, if you're one of them, that you are making sure they're meeting those minimum requirements with everyone. And then, maybe not as relevant now because we don't have as many. Well, we probably still have quite a few people under the 4th edition task list that are trying to catch up on their hours. But I feel like it's not as big of a problem now. But if you do have a supervisee that's coming to you, and they have hours that were under the 4th edition task list, a lot of times they might just be, here's all my hours from 4th edition, and now I need this many more to meet the 5th edition. Not all those hours are going to transfer over. The requirements for the 4th edition were more lax in some areas than others. For the 5th edition task list, like the supervisory contacts was less, but the client observation was more. So It's just different. So those things are not necessarily going to just transfer over. I have my supervisees input all of their hours, including their 4th edition hours, into my current tracker with the 5th edition. So it's going to flag any errors for months that are not going to count or that need to be adjusted because they're not meeting that specific criteria. So just don't assume that it's all going to transfer over without actually checking each individual month. All right, and now we're going to talk about ethics. Just going to do kind of a basic review of ethics that are related to supervision. Section 4 of our ethics code is related to this, responsibilities to supervisees and trainees. We have 12 subsections that are related to that, and I'm going to focus in on 6 of them that we're going to go over right now. But be sure that you do read through all of these and you understand each and every one of them and how that relates to your supervision. So the first one I want to go over is 4.02, which is supervisory competency. So this states that we're only going to supervise and train other people within our own identified scope of competence, and that we are only going to provide supervision after obtaining knowledge and skills in the effective supervisory practices, and that we're continually evaluating and improving our supervisory repertoires through professional development. So when we're talking about competency, specifically related to, the populations that person's working with, that can include different ages, behaviors, diagnosis, cultural considerations. If I only work with like very young kids, like preschool age kids, and I have somebody coming to me that wants supervision for adults, well, that's not going to be in my scope of competence, so I shouldn't provide them with supervision. So you want to make sure that you are competent with the area that the person is coming to you with before you agree to provide them with supervision in that area, whether it's the setting that they work in, the ages, whatever that looks like. Maybe they want to focus on OBM and you don't have experience in OBM. That's going to be then out of your scope of competence. Now, we're not stuck forever in the area of our original training. So it's not like, I've only worked with this population, so I'm stuck in this population and I can never work outside of it. Competence can be gained through mentorship, supervision, and experience. And actually, this is one of the main motivators that I had for creating my intensive competency workshops, because there's not a lot of avenues out here for us to develop competency. And of course, I'm not competent in everything, but the things that I am working towards developing workshops for this, because you can go to a CEU, you can go to a masterclass course or read literature or whatever it is, and that's going to give you a piece of the competence. That's going to give you the knowledge piece. But there's not a lot of avenues for us to get that actual hands-on mentorship on the work that we're actually doing and getting feedback on what we're actually doing with our clients, unless you happen to work with somebody or know somebody that has competency in that area. So you can develop your competency through, looking at literature, through engaging with professional groups, through doing training, but we also need to have that hands-on piece, that supervision, that mentorship to also develop that area. It can't just be the knowledge component without having that experiential knowledge as well. And then we have a supervisory volume. So this is talking about pretty much what we're committing to. So we should only take on the number of supervisees or trainees that allow us to provide effective supervision and training. We should be knowledgeable about and comply with any relevant requirements, and consider what the trainee's caseload is, the amount of time and resources that you're going to need to put forth in providing this person with supervision. So really, hopefully through this CEU, other materials that I have out there, you realize that supervision, it is time consuming. And I have tools to make it easier, but it still is time consuming. You still need to meet with these people. You need to plan their supervision. We need to make sure that we are doing a good job providing high quality, effective supervision. So we can't go out there and say we're going to start taking on supervisees to earn some extra money and have 20 supervisees you're working with when you also work as a BCBA. Like that's going to be overextending yourself so much. So you want to make sure that you understand what your availability is and that you are only taking on supervisees that you can effectively supervise. Now, another problem with this is that you could potentially be at a company that just assumes you're going to provide supervision to any supervisee that comes through on your caseload. And that shouldn't be the case. You should definitely manage that appropriately and advocate for yourself and your time and establish those boundaries of what you can do so that we're not just taking on too much. Because if we take on too many supervisees, it can result in them failing to develop adequate skills that they need to become BCBAs. They could develop problematic skills because we don't have the time to be able to actually assess all of these things and fix the problems that are occurring because you're just trying to keep your head above water. It could be harmful to the clients or consumers that they're working with. And it also could be harmful to future supervisees. Let's say that you are providing supervision to somebody and for whatever reason, you're stretched for time, you're being overloaded. It's not great supervision because you just have too much going on. Well, that is going to affect that supervisee. It's going to affect the clients that they're working with, but it's also going to affect all the supervisees that person supervises in the future. I mean, eventually they're going to become a BCBA. Eventually they're going to be supervising people. And if we use that as a model for what supervision looks like, it's going to have a trickle down effect to everybody else that they're providing supervision to. So that's why it's really important. Of course, we all want to do a good job and we all have good intentions. And there are things that just are barriers to that. Again, a lot of times it's time constraints and having too much on our plates, but that's where we want to establish those boundaries to make sure that this does not become a problem. So I kind of talked about some reasons why this might occur, but we could be responding under negative reinforcement contingencies that really there's a lot of people who need help and training and we want to help them, right? There could be substantial financial benefits if you are, doing remote supervision and you're like doing this having people pay you for supervision. Again, that's what I do. People pay me for supervision, but I still can't take on a ton of supervisees, even if I wanted to. Like that's not going to even fit in my schedule. So like I have a set number of people that I would work with, and then that's where I grow my company and hire other supervisors to take on really the majority of my supervisees. I only work with a couple of people at this point. So you can still manage your business and manage things to have the financial benefit without overextending yourself. And then supervisors may be directed by employers to take on an inappropriate number of supervisees. And that's what I was talking about. And that is probably the main thing that I see happening. I don't really see a lot of people out there that are focused on, the financial benefit of like overloading themselves. It's more so that, we're working somewhere that we have probably more cases that we're comfortable with and now more supervisees that we're comfortable with, and we just keep getting more and more and more. And there also could be the problem of a skill deficit. So maybe there's issues with how to organize and plan the time effectively. Maybe you're not actually overloaded, but it's just hard to really organize all of the things that you're doing to make sure that you give time to everybody. So again, I don't think any of us are out there like maliciously trying to do, not great supervision, but there are reasons why that can occur. So we want to really make sure that we're evaluating our time, our commitments, and what it is that we can realistically do. And then 4.04, that talks about accountability and supervision. So this is a really, really important piece to understand that you are accountable for the supervisory practices and also for the professional activities of your supervisee. So you're responsible for your supervisee. That means the client services they're giving, the supervision, training, research, public statements, like all the things that they're doing. You're their supervisor. You are the responsible party. So this really emphasizes the importance of proper oversight and documentation. You really need to know what your supervisee is doing, what their level of competence is, what you are delegating to them, because you are responsible for them. So if your supervisee goes out and does something like, ridiculous or, really bad for a client, we do have a partial responsibility there, especially if we're asking them to do stuff and, it's not really on their level of competence or they've not been supervised appropriately to be able to do those things. So just make sure that you take the commitment seriously, because we don't want to just take on anybody. And that's why there should be like an application process for somebody to get supervision from you, whether it's company related or whether you're taking in your own supervisees. We don't want to just take on anybody, because we want to make sure that we're taking on somebody that we feel comfortable working with as well, because you are going to be the responsible party for that person while they are in supervision. And then providing supervision and training. So this is just stating that we need to provide supervision and training in compliance with acceptable requirements, and that we also design and implement supervision and training procedures that are evidence-based, focused on positive reinforcement, and individualized for each supervisee and their circumstances. So this needs to be effective and evidence-based supervision that's grounded in the knowledge of our basic principles. We need to use effective and ethical methods that are going to be used to meet defined goals, and that they should regularly contact research literature. Now, some challenges with this is that it does take substantial time and effort to organize for each supervisee. And like I've said, signing off on just like regular RBT hours is of course not sufficient, because that does not meet this ethical requirement of growing their skills. And we'll talk about my supervision curriculum here in a bit, but that's kind of why I created it. It gives you like an entire path to follow to make sure that you're touching on all the task list areas. And then of course, like it can be individualized in the order that you go through or the additional materials that you give, to make sure that, it's relevant for that specific supervisee that you're working with. And then we have performance monitoring and feedback. So we need to be engaged in and documenting ongoing evidence-based data collection and performance monitoring of our supervisees. So we need to provide them timely, informal, and formal praise and feedback designed to improve their performance. And we really need to document this formal feedback as well. And then when there's any performance issues that come up, we should have a system in place for addressing this. And then we also have the documentation. So again, it's not going to be a surprise that there is a performance issue, because we will have had this documentation. Just saying you're doing a great job at the end of every session is not going to be sufficient. So for this, really the focus of our supervisory experience should be for the supervisee to gain knowledge and skills. We need to be giving them that positive and corrective feedback that's really essential for what they're doing. Positive feedback is good, but it needs to be specific, even like not just good job. It was like good job doing this, this, and this. And then corrective feedback, because we want them to grow their skills. We don't want to just ignore an issue if there is something that they can improve on. Now, lack of effective feedback and reinforcement, this can be harmful because it can result in a lack of skills or ineffective or harmful skills. If poor feedback and reinforcement is modeled for the supervisee, then it could be used when that person is a supervisor and provides supervision to others. Again, it's got to have that trickle down effect. They're going to model the supervision that they received. And we should be collecting data on skills as we are required to sign off on their abilities. That final verification form, we are signing off that they, again, meet the reasonable criteria for like an entry-level BCBA. So we should have some data as evidence that they do actually meet that criteria. And then we have 4.10, so evaluating the effects of supervision and training. So we should be actively engaged in continual evaluation of our own supervisory practices using feedback from others, the client, the supervisee, looking at what those outcomes are. And we should document self-evaluations and make timely adjustments to our practices as they are needed. So with this, I use a supervision evaluation, and it should be done at 3 different levels. We should be looking at the consumer performance, so the client, how are they performing? Because that's going to be a reflection of the supervision that we're giving. We should be looking at the staff performance, and then we should be looking at the supervisor performance, so getting feedback on what it is that we're doing. And then, are the supervision activities effective? Are we increasing the supervisee's knowledge, their skills, their effectiveness? And are we establishing a relationship between the supervisee, the supervisor, and the client, and making sure that all of that is effective? A lack of evaluation, this could result in the supervisor could be providing effective supervision, but not specifically evaluating the effects, which may reduce the supervisor's ability to replicate those effects with subsequent supervisees. So maybe you're doing awesome, but you don't know what about what you're doing is awesome. So how are you going to know to continue it? You also could continue to provide, maybe you're doing ineffective supervision, but you don't know that you're doing ineffective supervision because you're not asking. And a lot of times the supervisee isn't going to just come up to you and initiate that conversation. So that could pose a risk for future supervisees that you work with, and also for that supervisee eventually providing supervision similar to what they're getting. And you also could unknowingly be providing damaging supervision, therefore doing harm to the current supervisee and potentially the consumers, as well as future risks that are listed in the second point. So we really want to make sure that we are looking at what we are doing in our supervision and making sure that it is effective and it is growing the supervisees in the skills in the way that it needs to. And then finally, I do want to touch on the continuity and termination of supervision, which are the last 2 subsections there. So supervisees are our clients, and we can't abandon them. Just like we can't abandon our clients that we work with, we can't abandon our supervisees as well. We can't just say one day, hey, I'm going to stop doing supervision like in 3 days. So continuity of supervision should be a priority. And if termination of supervision is a necessary outcome for any reason, we need to take all actions to minimize the negative impact to the supervisee. Even if you're going to be stopping supervision because of the supervisee's behavior, again, all of that should be written in your contract. You should have a plan in place for that. So again, it's not going to be just like, hey, we're done with supervision right now, and it's a complete surprise to that person. So just make sure that you take that into account as well, and you realize that they are technically considered our clients when we are working as a supervisor for them as well. All right, and now let's look at technology. So for technology, we're just going to do a review of several of the different things that can make supervision easier for you. Again, I do remote supervision, so a lot of what I do has to involve technology, but even if you do in-person supervision, these things can be really good resources for you as well. And I'm not affiliated with any of these companies or anything like that. It's just things that I use for my supervision. So one of the big ones is GoReact. This is great for distance or in-person supervision. It is where a client can upload videos of the supervisee working with the client, or really whatever. I've done this with parents too. I've had parents upload videos so I can do more effective parent training and provide them with feedback on what they're doing. So like there's a ton of options for using GoReact. The thing about this that's really great, it's all about uploading videos and providing feedback on them, but you can provide pretty much in the moment feedback at the exact spot in the video. So let's say you're watching a video in Go React and that person like did a great job doing reinforcement, or they missed something that they should have done. You start typing, it pauses the video, you can type in your whole feedback for that section. When that person is then watching this video back, your feedback pops up in all the appropriate spots. So it's good for you providing feedback. And I've also had people utilize this as a self-evaluation tool. Like, I'm going to record you working with a client, and then I want you to go through and you evaluate yourself and tell me where the issues were. So it really is helpful at growing skills. You can create rubrics in there for evaluating videos. You can use tags for quick and easy feedback. And one of the best things is that it is HIPAA, COPA, and FERPA compliant, so there should be no issues using it in our field. I have the link there because you want to go to getgoreact.com instead of just Go React, because that takes you to the dashboard to log in. It does have a cost associated with it. It kind of varies whether you as the instructor is paying for it or the client, and how long that duration is. But it's a really, really great video feedback tool that you can have really a variety of uses for. Then I also use Google Drive for sharing folders, live updates, pretty much all of my documentations that I use, I have in Google Drive, so we can see instantly supervisee hours, house all of their reports, documents, contracts, all of those things, and easily share supervision notes. And then also remember, you need to keep documentation for 7 years. So I find this just to be an easy way that both of us can keep that documentation for 7 years in case it's ever needed in an audit, that you will always have access to it. Google Forms is another thing that's really helpful. There's other form systems like JotForms and other things like that, but those do have a cost associated to it, and Google Forms is free, and it's usually sufficient for most things that you would need to use it for in supervision. You can put your evaluations in there. Maybe applications for people to apply to get supervision with you, to give or receive feedback. You can put quizzes in there, and it just makes it really easy to collect that information. And then also you have a set form that you can send to all of your supervisees over time, so you're not having to create this every single time you have a new supervisee that you need to do this with. And then Adobe Sign, this I also use for getting all of my signatures. It has timestamp signatures that meet the BACB acceptable signature policy. They don't need them timestamped anymore, but I still like that feature. So we can see that everything is being signed on time. I use it for contracts, monthly verification forms, final verification forms. And then this also stores documents for all signees. That's going to meet that ethical requirement of keeping all documentation for 7 years, as long as you don't go in there and delete them. And then my final piece of technology that I want to mention is Calendly, and this is scheduling software. It really easily connects to your existing calendar, so it'll block off the appropriate times of doctor's appointments or whatever else you have going on. And it really eases the ability for the supervisee to schedule meetings with you. And then you can also collect payment if you're doing paid supervision in there, so they can, if you're doing it like on a instance by instance basis, they can make sure that they pay you before you start your supervision meeting, because it'll be required before they can even schedule it. So I think that also can make things a lot easier, especially with remote supervision, where you don't have to have back and forth conversations of finding the perfect time. It's just right there and they can schedule it. So those are just a few things that I use, a few pieces of technology that I use in my supervision. And then I also want to go over the resources. And again, these are resources that I've created. I offer them to other BCBAs, but again, I made them because I needed them and they did not exist. So all of these things, I don't think I could be doing remote supervision at the scale that I do if I did not have these tools. So just a refresher, supervision content. We need to be teaching supervisees new skills that are applicable to the BCBA or BCABA position to grow their skills. They need new skills, not the skills that they currently have as an RBT. So they should be reading journal articles to increase their knowledge. They should be conducting assessments with our supervision, of course, skill assessments, preference assessment, functional analysis. There's BCBAs that don't do functional analysis. So, we're going to have so many more supervisees coming through that don't have that experience, and they absolutely should have that experience to do those things. They should be able to design, implement, and monitor client programs, write assessments and reports and behavior intervention plans, use ABA and OBM strategies to train and improve the performance of others, use staff evaluations, reinforcement system, corrective procedures with their coworkers, training them as well as with parents and also with their clients. It is a lot of stuff that we have to teach somebody, and this takes a lot of planning. So how do we teach all of these skills? This is where it can definitely feel overwhelming sometimes that you have this whole amount of stuff that you need to train somebody, and you don't really have an idea of how to get through all of it in a structured and systematic way. So some tips that I have for this is, as you are providing supervision, create a bank of resources sorted by the task list or whatever other relevant way you want to sort it. That can include journal articles, websites, videos, podcasts, like whatever you are having people use to learn more material. Start creating that bank of resources. And then decide on a structure for it. So like, how are you going to group these items? How are you going to group the task list items? You don't necessarily just want to go in order because that's not really functional. You want to group things from easier to more complex as somebody is going through it. And then you want to test supervisees' conceptual and applied skills as you move through the material. So can they talk about the concepts fluently? Can they apply the concepts with their clients? How do you know that they are actually becoming competent in these areas? And when you're done, can this person pass the BCBA exam and work independently? Because if we do 2,000 hours of supervision, and now we have somebody that's continuously failing the exam because they don't understand this information outside of just working with, a pediatric client with autism, then we've not done our job as a supervisee. As a supervisor, providing this to the supervisee. We want them to become competent and confident when they're done. They should be able to pass the exam and work, fairly independently as an entry-level BCBA. So that is where I've created my supervision curriculum. I created this by what I just suggested for you to do by creating a bank of resources. That's how it started, but it took probably over 5 years of time to put all of this together in a structured manner that I could actually hand off to the supervisors that work for me and have them utilize it and provide consistent supervision, which then ultimately turned into something that I now provide to really any supervisors that want to use it. So this saves tons of time because you already have access to conceptual assignments and also applied client assignments. So there's other curriculums out there that kind of gives you like a guide of what you should be doing, but this actually gives you the material of here, do this actual thing. And here are the answers for it. And here's the grading rubric of how you should be assessing your clients, your supervisees with their clients. It has all the materials in there, conferences, journal articles, videos, like whatever materials that are needed for learning it. You can test your supervisee's skills. There's rubrics to score hands-on performance. There's comprehension assessments. There's a 50-question final exams for each section. They get more opportunities for unrestricted hours through this because you actually have assignments to give them that is for unrestricted hours. Plus it has competency evaluations, supervisee and supervisor evaluations, a supervision guide with the correct answers and teaching tips, a grade book for tracking due dates, and their grades that they get on everything. And there's 4 mini mock exams by section topic as well. So let's take kind of a look of what this is included. So there's two versions of my supervision curriculum. There's an online version, which has fill-in PDFs, instant access, of course, month-to-month plans, perfect for in-person or distance supervision. And then I also have a book version, which is a 3-book set of the applied workbook, foundations workbook, and supervisor guide. And that's great for in-person supervision, probably not so great for remote supervision because you have to just cut it up and keep sending them scanned in pages. But I just want to go over some of the things that are included this, because whether you use this supervision curriculum or just take this as an idea to use for your supervisees with some own things that you can create, these are kind of integral parts to the supervision curriculum that you can take this and utilize it with all of your supervisees, of course, individualizing it based off of where they are in the supervision program that you're providing them. But this is how you can make sure that you're touching on all aspects of the task list without feeling like you're reinventing the wheel for every single supervisee that you have. So here I have comprehension assignments. This is where the supervisees can demonstrate their conceptual knowledge of the task list items, because yes, they should be getting this through school, but how are they applying it to their clients? And are they able to actually talk about it to train, train staff members, to train parents? And this is where you can help get an idea of where their conceptual knowledge is. You can provide feedback and troubleshooting issues before they attempt to apply these skills with a client. And it coincides with the learning material. And it also is a great study material for the exam, having them go through all the comprehension assignments. And then that's just a different example. So there's like fill in the blanks, there's essay questions, multiple choice questions. Basically, it's going to cover everything that they potentially need to cover and demonstrate that conceptual knowledge before going over to now the applied skills, which is the other piece of it, is that they need to be able to now apply these skills that they've learned with their clients. So there's applied skills assignments and grading rubrics for every single thing that we want to see them do. It's going to cover all the different topics. There's a scoring criteria for the task analysis of that skill. It allows them to have a structured evaluation and feedback of the hands-on skill that supervisees really need to have. They need to know what steps it is that they're missing out on, so you can have them go through it again until they can master this and move forward. So whether you use this curriculum or not, it is highly recommended that you create structured rubrics to assess these applied skills, because otherwise, how are we doing it in an objective manner? So create these rubrics of specifically what it is that you need to see, all the steps you need to see, and you can use that to give them structured and documented feedback on what it is that they're doing. And then it also includes mini mock exams. So there are 50 question multiple choice exams at the end of every section. It's going to cover all task list areas in that section. And it's going to look at, can the supervisee generalize the knowledge to unique situations and questions? Because, as you guys know, the BCBA exam is not going to be all about, working with kids with autism. There's questions that are just relevant to ABA as a science. So we want to make sure that supervisees can generalize this information, understand and use the terminology, and apply it to situations that maybe they've not encountered. And this is going to give them the opportunity to practice that and you information on where you need to provide more training. And then just to look at the different sections that are included in it, this is how I organize my curriculum, and you can take that as an idea if you have your own materials that you're trying to organize. The first section, we go over foundational concepts and basics of measurement. So we're going to go over, of course, the dimensions of ABA, measurements, the philosophical concepts, some basic concepts that they need, like operant and respondent behavior, how to read articles, graphing and analyzing data. All of those things are going to be covered first in their first few months of supervision. Then we go over to behavior change basics. So functions of behavior, punishment and reinforcement, motivating operations, schedules of reinforcement, those things we're going to talk about. Then we move into assessments and report writing for the third section. This is where we're going to go over in depth, have a section on all of the, common assessments that they need, VB-MAP, ABLS, AFLS, and more. We're going to look at verbal behavior, parent interview, how to do report writing, and basic program implementation. And then in the final section, we're talking about decreasing behavior and then some more advanced topics. So we're looking at advanced behavior change with more complex procedures, decreasing challenging behavior, functional analysis, writing a behavior intervention plan, collaborating with others, doing parent training, supervision, and then our second section of ethics. So that's just the look of how I organize my curriculum. And of course, I have, supervisees that I go in different orders for, but this is a good method that I found. If you have somebody coming new into supervision, that going in this order is really going to help build their skills as you go through everything. And then we've talked a lot about documentation here as well. So I also utilize, I have a supervision documentation package, which is all the things that I use to really document everything that I need to meet our BACB requirements and also ethical requirements for everything that you need to have documents for. So I have a deposit balance sheet, which that's just relevant for those that are doing paid supervision. But then I have experience hours trackers for the supervisees to track their hours, supervision notes, competency evaluations, supervision evaluations, a supervision contract, and task list comparisons. So my supervision notes, these are the notes that I use to track all of the supervision that I do. So I'm in a supervision meeting and I'm in here typing notes, to-do lists, things that I'm giving them feedback on. So we have all of that documented. And then the experience hour tracker, this is where my supervisees track their daily and monthly fieldwork hours. This is an example of like what they track in a very detailed, itemized way for each month, that they're tracking each instance of work that they've done. And then all of that goes to a dashboard where you can see all of that information, monthly graphs of it, color-coded things pop up if there's any issues or reasons why something would not count. And then I have supervision evaluations. There is one for supervisees and also one for the supervisor as well. So you can use this structured form to provide feedback to your supervisees, and then they have one also to provide structured feedback to you. Because again, if we just ask our supervisee, how's supervision going? Well, there's most often you're not going to get an honest response because you're their supervisor. They might not feel comfortable giving you that response. But if they have something that is so structured to be able to give you feedback over many different aspects of your supervision, you're much more likely to get a more legitimate response from them, that you can take that information and make changes to your supervision if it's needed. And then I also have competency assessments. Basically, they're going to assess themselves. I have supervisees do this as a self-assessment, but then I also go through at the end of each section and I also assess their skills in each of these areas, where it's going to look at, are they fluent on these skills, or do they just have some information? Can they talk about it? Have they contacted it? Or maybe they've not contacted it at all. And then they're going to rate themselves here, or you're going to rate them. And then it's going to put all this information in a beautiful grid so you can get a visual of where they are and also see their progress over time through each evaluation that you do with them. So then by the end of supervision, ideally, all of this should be filled out with all of those colors, and you shouldn't see any gaps in the information that they have. And then I also have a master class called Exceptional Supervision. So this CEU, this is really a more basic CEU where we're going over, really a lot of this information you can find in the BACB or the BCBA handbook in our ethics code, but I'm really putting it all together for you. If you really want a more deep dive into providing effective supervision, you want to check out this masterclass. It's for supervision CEUs. It's really good for BCBAs that are providing supervision while also trying to juggle your caseload and paperwork and all the other things you have to do. It's going to give you the training and tools through 4 modules to provide high quality and supervision in a lot less time with a lot less effort that you can put in place today. There's also a bunch of worksheets in there that can help you implement what you're learning through the masterclass with your supervisees right away. And then finally, I know I've talked a little bit about my intensive competency workshops, and one of my newest ones that I have coming out in January is the Supervision Entrepreneur. So if you are really passionate about supervision, just like I am, if you want to, turn doing supervision into a side gig or even a full-time, job that you're going to grow and, stop working for somebody else and just do supervision through a company that you want to create, this is perfect for you. It's a 6-week course. It's going to teach you how to incorporate your practical skills as a BCBA with effective supervision strategies and also behavior-based business and marketing skills so that you can actually start a business doing this. And although the workshop is focused on building a supervision business, really the skills can be applied to really any relevant service-based business. Maybe you want to do a parent coaching business or sleep training or whatever it is that you want to do. You can apply a lot of this to that. But through this workshop, we're going to go over supervision excellence, ethics and responsibilities, how to engage with your audience, planning your business, behavior-based marketing, and expanding for sustainable growth. So you'll also get a bunch of CEUs for attending. And then I also recommend with all of my intensive competency workshops, the whole point of the competency piece is that there is an option for live mentorship. So I definitely recommend adding on the entrepreneur mentorship for live support after you complete the workshop so you can have that competency piece. And then I also provide supervision, of course, that is why I know all of this and I've been doing it for years and years. So if you know anybody that does need supervision, or if you do want to provide remote supervision but don't want to go through the hassle of starting your own company to do it, you can definitely reach out to ABC Behavior Training. Some benefits is that we use a structured supervision curriculum. If you're providing supervision for me, all the paperwork and billing and everything is taken care of for you. All you have to do is focus on the supervision. We offer individual supervision, which is, of course, just one-to-one supervision. We do 3-month cohorts, which is a 50% group supervision. So everybody is going to be following the same material within that 3-month commitment that they're doing. So it allows them to follow a structured plan using the curriculum, and they also can save money by doing the group supervision piece to it. And then I also work with companies and universities. You guys can collaborate with us for your employee or student supervision because there's discounts for group supervision. You can use customized cohorts to send people through it or individual supervision, but that can take a lot of stress off of the BCBAs or off of the students that are trying to find their supervised fieldwork experiences on their own by being able to collaborate with a company that does it in a much larger scale. And then if you haven't listened to Behavior Crew podcast, definitely go check that out. That's my podcast. I mentioned that because I've recently had quite a few episodes that I've done on supervision that will go over some of the information that we've covered here, but then I also have stuff going over things we didn't talk about here. So of course, those are all free to listen to. There's 2 to 4 new episodes each month. We cover a variety of topics that are related to BCBAs or ABA in general. There's interviews, and then there's also free resources that I reference on there as well. But if you do have more interest or questions on supervision, definitely go check that out. And look at the more recent supervision ones that I've done. And I have that on my website, or, you can go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you have any comments or questions, you can always reach out to me. My email address is mdreskis@abcbehaviortraining.com. You can go to my website, abcbehaviortx.com, to get more information or contact me through there as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and open it up. If you guys have any questions, comments, I'm going to check in the chat box here as well. But you can also just unmute yourself if you want to talk. So Yes, thank you. You're welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.